For the men deployed in the inhospitable Siachen Theater, there is nothing more cheerful than the sound of an approaching helicopter across the valley. The chopping sounds of the rotor signal, the arrival of the much-needed essential supplies and rations, and for those injured, the arrival of the savior. For troops deployed in several high-altitude posts, which remain inaccessible by roads and mule tracks, these helicopters are the sole connection with the outside world. Flying these helicopters are the brave men of the Army's Aviation Corps, which is in charge of manning and operating a major chunk of the aerial assets under the command of the Indian Army. The Aviation Corps, which is the youngest, yet the most striving wing of the Army, is the extended arm of the ground troops in the third dimension. The ARM, since its inception in 1987, as an air observation unit, has today evolved to perform a wide array of operations ranging from battlefield operational tasks, to servicing the forward deployed troops and to evacuating the injured from the battlefield at moment's notice. With increasing role in the battlefield, the ARM has over time emerged as the largest operator of helicopters amongst the armed forces. With its unique ability to provide ground commanders with the option of rapid mobility and deployment of both men and machine to anywhere in the battlefield, the Aviation Corps has established itself at the center stage of the Army's push for integrating all combat units to effectively achieve battlefield supremacy. This unique capability of the Aviation Corps is being called upon by the ground commanders at a never-witnessed pace in the recent past, especially along the northern borders. India's growing hostilities with its neighbors, along the inaccessible heights of the northern mountains, has mandated the Army to employ assets that would guarantee not only rapid movement but also platforms that would provide punitive strike options. With its wide array of helicopters, it is the Aviation Corps which stands ready to guarantee the commanders with this much-needed capability. Even as the dependency on the Corps grows exponentially across the battlefield, the ranks and files of the Aviation Corps is however staring at an uncertain future, as a ghost haunts from within. Of the hundreds of helicopters under the command of the ARM, a majority of them are decrepit and lack the capability to effectively operate in lieu with the growing operational roles. Top serving officers of the ARM have time and again raised the need for rapid modernization of this crucial arm to maintain satisfactory preparedness status along the front lines. Forming the backbone of the Aviation Corps is the indigenously designed and developed Advanced Light Helicopter DRUV, which are operating in both utility and armed roles. These HAL-manufactured helicopters have been performing satisfactorily across a wide operational horizon. The major concern however lies with the fleet of Chetak and Cheetah helicopters, which are the real assets providing the last-mile reach to several of the high-altitude forward posts. Making several sorties a day, regardless of the weather and terrain, these helicopters have been the feeder assets for the forward deployed troops in some of the world's most inhospitable battle theaters. A majority of these Chetak and Cheetah helicopters in operation with the AAC have been in service for the past 3 decades and have now, well surpassed their operational life. With the maintenance and upkeep of these helicopters becoming a major issue, the ARM is echoing calls for immediate replacements. A breakdown in the fleet of these utility helicopters, which are also being widely used as surveillance and reconnaissance platform, threatens to cut off the well-established supply lines for the forward deployed troops in several high-altitude terrains. AAC has itself tried relentlessly to address these shortfallings through successive acquisition programs, which have all unfortunately met with limited success. But these efforts have met with limited success as successive replacement programs of the Corps have been struck down, leaving it largely toothless. More worrying is the fact that the ARM, even after almost 3 decades of its inception, has altogether failed to acquire the all-crucial medium and heavy lift capabilities. With India's conflict steadily moving towards mountainous terrain, a greater need is being felt for the induction of these assets. This was aptly displayed during the recent Doklam standoff between the Indian and Chinese troops in the Sikkim region, when India was mandated to deploy troops en masse in a short interval. Further, as India's potent strike corps gain ground, there is an increasing need for the influx of armed helicopters to add tooth to the strike capability of these field formations. Even though the ARM has realized the need for these platforms through the induction of the indigenously developed Rudra, the weaponized version of the ALH, there still exists a vast void in this arena. The infamous turf war between the Air Force and Army had for years left every single program of the Corps in this regard in a limbo. Even though the Corps has cleared for induction of both the Light Combat Helicopter and Boeing Apache, there still exists a need to induct these helicopters in greater numbers. The highly fluidic nature of the current battlefield demands for the allocation of dedicated platforms to counter threats at a faster rate. Hence, it is imperative that the Aviation Corps, which remains to be one of the fastest responders, be armed adequately to answer situations as they arise in the battlefield. The modernization of the Corps is being taken up under the Army Aviation Modernization Plan, which was drafted in an effort to make the Corps not just an equipment and inventory-based arm, but a capability-based organization that would effectively help commanders apply decisive combat power. The pressing need for the Corps remains to be the en masse induction of light utility helicopter, which will relieve the obsolete fleet of Cheetah and Chetak helicopters. The Indian Army, after decades of hunt for these platforms, has down-selected the Russian helicopters manufactured Kamov K-226T utility helicopters. The Indian and Russian government have already formed a joint venture for manufacturing 200 of these helicopters locally in India. While the state-run Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, a lead rotary aircraft solution provider, is expected to manufacture 140 of these helicopters, while the initial 60 airframes are to be acquired in flyaway condition. The state-run manufacturer is optimistic of receiving orders for at least 200 of these platforms. Powered by a single rotor engine, it will be these helicopters that shall actually replace a bulk of the Chetak and Cheetahs along the high-altitude terrain. Even though the Army has been using the ALH-DRU for utility roles, the Corps has on various occasions raised the need for acquiring both medium and heavy tactical lift capability for rapid mobility of troops. Currently the role remains deeply entranced with the Air Force, which, citing the Joint Implementation Instructions that was drafted way back in 1986, has steadfastly curtailed Army's request for acquiring these platforms. Several retired aviators quipped that this interdependency between the arms threatens to derail the pace of the battle and noted that there exists a need for these tactical battle support platforms to facilitate inter-theater movement of troops and equipment. Even as the Air Force stonewalls the procurements, the Army is betting big on the underdevelopment 12-ton Indian multi-role helicopter of HAL. However, the pressing need has pushed even the Army to look out for options and has released ARFI for leasing helicopters. The Army has time and again raised a requirement for armed helicopters to be deployed along the Western Theater supporting the 1st, 2nd and 12th Strike Corps, which have all been put in charge of launching armored offensives against India's arch-rival Pakistan in times of conflict. World over, all military doctrines dictate that land forces be supported by integral air power assets. U.S. Army has traditionally maintained that integral airborne offensive power assets, which works in lieu with the artillery, will help in rapidly securing the battlefield for the infantry. MOD's decision to enable Army's Aviation Corps to operate these platforms comes as a huge relief to the force, which had been echoing the need for these armed platforms to support its infantry operations along the front lines. Successive efforts of the Army in the past had gone in vain, as every other acquisition, including the prior deals for Mi-35 and Apache combat helicopters, have been routed to the Air Force. The Army is also banking heavily on the indigenously designed and developed Light Combat Helicopter program. Designed by HAL, the LCH promises the Indian Army with strike capabilities not only in the plains and deserts, but also along high-altitude posts such as those along the Siachen Glacier. The Army has moved its first light combat helicopter squadron to Missimari, Assam, in the eastern sector near the line of actual control. The LCH, India's first indigenously designed and developed attack helicopter, is also the first dedicated attack helicopter operated by the Army. The Army raised the 351 Army Aviation Squadron to operate the LCH on June 1, 2022 at Bengaluru and received the first LCH in September. The shortest aerial distance of the LAC from Missimari is around 250 kilometers. Eventually, the Army is looking for another 95 LCH and the IAF another 65 of them. However, the contract is yet to be worked out and their induction is spread over the next 10 to 15 years. Army Aviation has 3 brigades at Leh, Missimari and Jodhpur operating around 145 indigenous advanced light helicopters, 75 of which are the Rudra weaponized variants, and around 190 aging Cheetah, Chinook and Chital helicopters. Another 25 AL-HMK-3 are on order, which will be inducted within 2 years. The Army will also start receiving the Apache attack helicopters in early 2024, 6 of which have been contracted under an estimated $800 million deal from Boeing in February 2020. In addition, the Army is also pushing a case for 11 more Apaches, for which negotiations are underway. With India's operational terrain and its hostilities with its neighbors growing exponentially, it is imperative that the government strengthens the ARM, to help enable the field commanders to exploit the true capabilities of the ARM.